Hi and welcome back. This is the Onyx 8 from Mackie. For the last couple of years, this has been my secondary audio interface, and soon I'll be moving my studio setup and will temporarily use this as my primary interface for a few weeks. I thought it might be helpful to go over the features of this mixer and particularly on how it works as an audio interface. I did a review 2 years ago of the Mackie Onyx8, which was quite popular on this channel, and I'll link that below if you want to see how this mixer compares to its bigger brother. Now, I have always liked using mixers of this type as audio interfaces. I really like the ability to handle routing or just turn on the mixer with no computer. I don't need a secondary app or anything, and then I can get sound, play from my guitars or synths. It also makes it simple to monitor what I'm recording. In my main setup, I've been using the SSL Big 6 for this function for a while now, and obviously it's at a completely different price point, but I find that the Onyx series of mixers offers many of the same advantages for creators at a fraction of that cost. So the key features of this board is that you can do multi-track recording over USB. You can take 2 mono channels, 2 stereo channels, and the main mix and record 8 channels at once into your DAW. The Tracktion Waveform DAW OEM license is also included when you buy these mixers. I'll show you a little bit more about how it looks in Waveform in a little bit. Now, you can also record the stereo main mix to SD card, and that can be up to 24-bit 96K hertz. You can get really good quality, but keep in mind that is a stereo mix. You also have a very convenient playback function from SD card that comes into this channel, and I found that actually more useful than expected. You can load MP3 files into folders and things on here. I'll show you a little bit about that later on, and then just play them back using the transport controls here. There is flexible internal effects. The internal effects processors have controls which are controlled by this encoder and button, and gives you probably more flexibility than you would find in comparable units from other manufacturers for mixers in this price range. It has Bluetooth playback, so you can pair with your phone using these controls here. Engage this if you want to play back from your phone. And it has a nice solid build quality with a steel construction. The power supply is built in, so you've got a normal power jack on the back, no wall wart. The sides are plastic, but they have a nice indent here, which makes it really easy to get your fingers in here to pick up this mixer. That's a summary kind of on the top level. So we're going to get started with the rest of this review by looking at the back of the board. So this is the back panel of the Onyx 8. You can see all the jacks are on the back of the unit, which is a little different than some other units that we'll talk about in a little while. You can see that we've got the power switch, a removable IEC jack that supports 100 to 240 volts, so all common power, and I like to see this. There's not an external wall wart like you see on some other units like this. The main outs are available here on TRS for your PA speakers. They're also available on balanced or unbalanced TRS style 1/4-inch jacks right here. For your control room monitor speakers, they're also available similarly on balanced 1/4-inch jacks, which you can also run unbalanced if you'd like to. So these also have corresponding controls on the front panel. You'll see you have a separate control room level, and you have a separate main out level on the front panel that go along with that. When you're hooking this to your computer, you've also got a USB-B type jack here. I'd prefer to see USB-C, but this is a very well-known jack, and if you've got the right cable, this causes no problem related to speed or anything else. It's worked just fine for me. Now back over on this side, we've got the output for your monitors, and this would be controlled from the monitor sends on the individual channels and the main monitor level output on the front panel. Also an effects FX or effects output. If you want to run from your effects sends to an external effects processor, you can do that. If you don't, then those effects will route to the internal effects, which is how I've typically used this. Now we start to see the layout of the Onyx channels. The first two channels offer these Neutrik connectors that have guitar jack 1/4 inch going into the center of them, but you can also connect up microphones to these as well. There's a TRS style insert to route out and in if you want to hook up a compressor. That would be the most typical application. So those are the first two channels. These channels also on the front panel have a high Z switch that you can enable if you're running an electric guitar or an electric bass into these channels directly. Now the next two channels operate either as mono mic inputs or stereo line level inputs. And that's the case for this channel and this channel. On the front panel, this is labeled 3.4 and this one is labeled 5.6. If you do plug a microphone in here and you're recording from this channel, you will get the same signal on both channels 3 and 4, for example. So that gives you the microphone input. And all of these can be routed to your digital audio workstation as 2 monos and 2 stereos, giving you a total of 6 channels of multi-track recording at the same time. Now channel 7 here offers stereo inputs left and right that are either balanced or unbalanced. If you plug in just to the top one, it's mono. That's the same with all of these here. If you plug into just the left side, it winds up being in mono. Now channel 7 is the one that on the front panel has some other special features, such as a 3.5 inch line level input. The SD card playback comes through here. Bluetooth also comes through there. So this is a specialized channel. This channel does also not route directly for multi-track recording. That ends with these channels right here. So that's kind of starting to define the limitations of this board. Now that we've explained the back panel, we're going to go back to the front panel and talk about the individual channels there. All right, now we're looking at the front panel of the Mackie Onyx 8, and we're going to set up some music playing on inputs 1 and 2, and I'm going to show you how gain staging works, and we'll go through the features of the channel in the process. So I've connected an old school cassette player to channels 1 and 2, which would indicate the left and right signals. So I'm going to get that started here, and then I'll walk through how the gain staging works. So I do have signal coming in here. We don't see anything yet, but if we turn this up more, you can see that there is music coming in there. Now to actually meter what's coming in and set the gain appropriately, you hit the solo button. When you hit the solo button on any channel, this meter becomes the meter for that channel, allowing you to set the gain. So if I set the gain right around here where it's peaking somewhere in the middle of the range of this meter, around 0, then we've got the gain staging set right. So I'll set the other channel the same way. Since it's a stereo pair, it would make sense to set them identically in this case. And now I've got those set up. And then I can also pan them wide here using the pan controls. I have this set up in my bench setup where I'm just playing through some very inexpensive speakers for that playback. Let's take a look at what else is on the channel. We've got low cut switches on each channel set at 100 Hertz, which you can engage. We also have high impedance, which says high Z here. You push this in if you're going to connect a guitar or a bass directly to the channel. This works for channels 1 and channels 2. The EQ section has high, mid, and low on these blue knobs, and then you have a dial here that allows you to set the frequency for booster cut of the mid-range, and this is true for channels 1 and 2 as well. Now the thing I like about this EQ, besides the sound, set at 12K and 80 Hertz on the high and the low, Mackie's done this for many years. They claim that that gives you a more musical sound. I found that typically the Mackie EQs work really well in practical applications. Now you can engage or disengage that EQ with a button here. I would say this is a little more unusual on a mixer in this kind of a mid-price range. So you can engage or disengage to see the effect of your EQ. And another great feature I like about this board. Moving down, you have the aux. This green knob then is used to mix. You can set up a mix from the different channels here and send it out to monitors. Typically this would be used for a stage monitor for live sound. So you have the aux out. And then you have this orange knob per channel, which allows you to send some of that signal over to the built-in effects. And then there is a master effects control here on the bottom section labeled effects. So that's kind of how that works. This also sends out to the jack on the back of the board called effects that allows you to use external effects if you would like to do that. The pan control, which I already talked about, and then that brings you to mute. When you hit mute, it will disengage this channel and it will also light up quite brightly. So great feature of this board is that the solo and the mute are nice and bright. Just generally the color scheme on this board makes a lot of sense. Now another thing about solo is when you hit it, you'll notice that over here you have the Rude solo light. The Rude solo light is an indicator. These have been on these boards since whenever they came out, the early 90s. It tells you that something's in solo mode, and that way you know that that's the case. And like I said before, when you hit solo, then it changes the metering from the main meter to allow this one to be a channel meter for the time that you've got solo engaged. On this board you have rotary level controls. If you move up into the 16 and 24 channel boards in the Onyx series, you will get faders instead of these kinds of a dial knob. One thing about it is that there is a detent right here when you're at unity gain, where you're not, boosting or cutting necessarily, and so that allows you to kind of easily find the center point. And that's true for most of these things, like the EQ. You can't see that in a video, but you can feel it when you're turning it. There's a detent when it's centered, the center position of the movement. That's how these channels work. Now, related to using this as an audio interface, these two channels will appear to your digital audio workstation as channels 1, 2 as inputs. So you've got two mono inputs that will appear, and that will work in any digital audio workstation. However, Tracktion Waveform, the OEM version of that, is shipped and included as a license with the Onyx series of mixers. So then moving on from here to the next two channels, these are stereo channels, and they have on each one a pair of inputs, 3, 4, and 5, 6. So if you use it for a microphone, you're going to get another 2 microphone inputs, 1 per each. So you could see this as mic. If you connect a mic on here, then basically this is going to act as an additional mono channel, and so does this. Related to your computer, in your digital audio workstation, 3, 4 will appear as a pair of channels, 5, 6 will appear as a pair of channels. If you connect a microphone, then you'll get the same information recorded on 3 and 4. On the back, like I showed you before, there are line inputs for separate left and right signals, and in that case, you'll wind up having a stereo channel here. All of these controls then operate on both channels. So this low cut would cut channels 3 and channel 4. The EQ would affect channels 3 and 4. And you also have the same EQ switch on here. Everything else is pretty much the same. In the event that you've got a stereo signal, then this pan operates as a balance. There's a slight difference between the meaning of pan and balance, but I don't think I'll get into that in this video. Now you will notice one of the key things is that this channel is special because it has a USB 1-2 switch. When you have this engaged, you will not be getting the signals from the physical hardware jacks, but instead it's a return off of your computer. So if you're playing computer audio and you select the Onyx 8, your computer audio will appear coming in here, and you need to depress USB 1-2 for that to work. So in typical operation in my small studio setup, I have both my DAW playback and my computer playback coming through this channel 3-4. Even will put a piece of tape here indicating that this is PC playback or Mac playback. So then I can adjust the level coming out of my digital audio workstation here and connect my voiceover mic and maybe a guitar on the first two channels. That leaves the next stereo channel, which works almost the same, free to connect something like a stereo keyboard or a guitar processor. And so if you look at its controls, they're the same. It also can route from the computer using 3-4. So you actually can choose in your computer or your digital audio workstation if you want to route a second pair back. Now that will use this channel up for new live inputs, but you could, for example, have your PC playback on this channel and your DAW playback on this channel. And this right here is why this is considered to be an 8x4 interface. Your 4 outputs from the computer wind up being these here, 1, 2, and 3, 4. That's the 8x4. Let me explain in what way this is an 8 input mixer relative to your computer. On your computer, you're going to see channels 1 and 2 as separate mono inputs, and then these will be a pair of stereo input. So if you add that up, that's 6 channels of input into your computer. And a little later in this video, I'm gonna show you how this looks in waveform, but it's similar in any digital audio workstation. Now the remaining inputs is the stereo mix. So you can also pick up a stereo mix on channels 7, 8. So from the perspective of your computer, you're going to see 1, 2, stereo 3, 4, stereo 5, 6, and stereo 7, 8. In many of these reviews, that is not clearly explained, and that's one of the reasons I make a point to try to really clarify that when I'm talking about these. As I said before, I like to use these mixers as an audio interface because I think it really gives me a lot of flexibility, but sometimes it's not clear exactly how they work as an interface, and so that's how this one works. Now if we go to channel 7, 8, you'll see this is a multi-function input. We don't have a mic preamp on this channel, but we do have 7, 8 line input jacks on the back with a gain control. You also can use this 3.5mm stereo in, which will also connect into this channel, or you can play back from the SD card. Now, you know probably that you can record to SD card, but you can also play back from SD card, meaning that you can load anything you want in terms of lists of WAV files or MP3 files onto SD card and have them ready to play back for your gig, or if you just want to listen to music through this. It's been a rather pleasant surprise. This functionality is something I've actually used quite a bit on this board, and I wasn't even thinking about that when I bought it. So to listen to playback from the SD card, you would depress this button, which will route the output from this section into channel 7, 8. And then over here, if you press the SD button, you'll see this file structure that shows a few things. Now, this would show the recorded files, but I'm going to go here where I've got these 2 sets that I've preloaded in there, and I created the folder structure and then put in some MP3 files. So all I need to do to get started is to click this, and it starts playback. And then these transport controls will then take you to the next song or the next song. You can pause them right there. And you can back up here and then go to a different folder and have another one. So that's how that kind of playback works. So that's one more source that you can play through channel 7/8. So I'll turn that off. You can also then turn on this, which is Bluetooth, which will route Bluetooth if you paired it to your phone or any other device that uses Bluetooth, and then you can play back Bluetooth through this channel as well. Now note, this channel doesn't have EQ. It does have an aux, but it doesn't have the effects. And then it has the other normal controls like level, panning, which operates as balance here, and mute and solo. You could connect a single input on the back, and then it would play in mono, and this would operate as a pan control. Now the thing about this channel is that this is not an input as a multi-track input for your computer. This will just come into the main mix, and you can mix it in with the main left-right, but there is no specific input that would capture this into your computer like these channels do. Now, that completes the explanation of the input channels. There's one other detail about this that I do want to mention. As you're using these channels as inputs for your computer for recording, they do not go through any of this stuff on the way into your recording. You're going to go through the mic preamp and the gain, and then at that point you pick it up in your computer. So any processing you do here is really for your monitoring mix or for when you're mixing for live sound. So it gives you a low latency way to monitor. You can set up all of this stuff, even use the delay, and have a really nice listening experience while you're recording, but it will not record any of the effects while you're in the process of multi-track recording. You can pick up the effects, however, if you record the main left-right stereo mix. That would take everything happening through the board that's coming to the main, and you'll pick that up on channel 7/8. While we're talking about how to use this as an audio interface, it's important to also take a look at this button right here that says send. Many pieces of software that maybe aren't as aware of audio, like Teams or Zoom or even Skype if you're old school, do not necessarily understand the higher channels on multi-track audio, and they want to see those coming back into the computer on channels 1 and 2. Well, this button will do that. Normally you pick up the stereo mix on 7/8, but if you push this down, now the whole mix from this board will appear on channels 1 and 2. Now, if you've done that, then they're not going to appear here. You're not going to pick up these mic inputs because it replaces those when you do this. But it's a great function. I've used this many times. You can just set up anything that you want to listen to, even this channel. Like if you wanted to record off of this channel, you can just set it up here and push this button and record off 1, 2, and do sampling or whatever you would like to do off of these features. So with that, I'm going to go over the remaining few things that there are on this board. This is the overall effects level. So once you've set up your effects, you've got that. You have this green button here, which will take the internal effects and route them to the external speaker output. Like if you have an aux mix set up here, you can route some of your effects send off to the speaker. Then you've got solo master here. So the solo bus or the solo controls on here work like this. When you hit solo, then the solo master controls the level of that solo, and then soloing will happen to the control room and the phone's output. So if you hit solo, it will not appear on the main, but it will appear in your headphones, and it will appear on the control room, and you set the master level for that right here. You also have a button here to choose if soloing comes pre-fader or after fader level. Pre-fader level is helpful if you want to leave something turned down. Pre-monitor the level on it before you put it into the mains. Very helpful if you're running sound for some type of a show. You can mute the main output here, and that pretty much completes those controls. Now let's talk about the effects section. Effects are accessed here. This gives you a list of all the effects. If you're in the mode where it looks like this, where you've got a certain effect up here, then just hit it again and you'll get a master list of all the different types of effects. So if we go to echo, then you can click this knob. This knob is a push button, and then it goes into the echo. From here, you can see that we have the different parameters. You can scroll through those with this encoder knob, select the one you want, such as time, hit the button, and then you can adjust this time in milliseconds by turning the knob. When you've got it set the way you want, hit it again, and then move on to feedback. We can turn feedback down if we would like. And if you go to the end for each of these effects, you've got 6 presets that you can also use. I'll back out of that, and the effects are flexible. And I would say compared to the other competitive board, the effects are a lot more tunable or tweakable on this than they are on, say, similar boards from Presonus. So I want to talk about that for a few minutes. There is a competitive board from Presonus called the AR8C that I would say is very similar. Sound quality wise, I have used that board as well. Sound quality wise, it's very similar. The key difference is that the effects section is a little more limited on that, and the jack field is facing up on it's the AR series boards. They have comparable boards across the range, across those two things. Otherwise, sound quality wise, they're pretty similar. And the main thing is, depending on your setup, you may like to have those jacks facing up. Like if you're constantly using that as a patch bay in your home setup, you might like to have the jacks on the top. But if you're on a stage setup, sometimes it's cleaner to have them on the back. And also, if you're setting this up on your desk and you're not rewiring it all the time, it does look cleaner, I think, to have the wires coming out the back of the board. One thing I didn't mention is that there is a Footswitch jack here. This is used to defeat the reverb. So if you plug in a Footswitch into that jack and hit that Footswitch, it will turn off the effects. The reason that you need this is so that if you're talking in a live situation at a gig and you were just singing, you can turn off the reverb or the echo while you're talking, which is going to sound a lot more professional to the audience. This section also offers a normal 1/4-inch headphone jack out on the top panel here, and 48-volt phantom power for condenser mics. That is available on the first 4 channels. All the channels that have mic preamps will share this switch, so if you engage that, that will provide 48-volt phantom power to all the microphones. Nice multi-segment meters, which we saw before, and that completes the top view. So this nice color display called Studio Command also has one more function, and you'll see it written on here, hold for settings. If I push both of them at the same time and hold them in, it goes into the settings mode. Autoplay means that if you put in a card here that has files on it that are MP3 files, they'll just start playing right away. And then record mode is for the internal recording. If you use the recording functions here, which is just simply put it in record and hit play, it will start recording your main mix. This sets the recording bit depth and resolution for those recordings to SD card. This is not related to multi-track recording. You would set that on your computer. But if I press this and then go through the options here, you'll see I can do from 16-bit 48, 96, 24-bit 48. This would be my most typical setting, but you can record up to 24-bit 96K for the best sound quality. The SD card allows you to format SD cards for use here, set the date, time, factory reset, and about, shows the firmware number. And this firmware is what was current at the time of recording this, which is 1.1.17. I found that this board needed to have the firmware updated. The firmware is updated by downloading a file from the Mackie website. You put it into the root directory on your SD card, turn the Onyx off and then back on, and then it will ask you if you want to load the new firmware. So the process is really straightforward and simple, but you'll want to do this if you have a lower firmware number. The biggest change that I found is that on the effects selection, this was kind of touchy on this before, and where it was just a little difficult to dial in exactly what you wanted, and it seems to have been debounced in the later firmware. So I would highly recommend checking that your firmware is set to 1.1.17 or higher if you've got any of these Onyx boards. So with that, in the next segment, we're going to take a look at how this looks in your digital audio workstation. As I said earlier, the Onyx 8 acts as an 8x4 audio interface. And here's how the setup looks in Waveform. You can see that we have our 4 outputs configured as 2 stereo pairs in the output section. And then here are the inputs configured as mic 1, mic 2, our 2 stereo pairs, as well as picking up the stereo output from the main of the mixer. Now, looking at that in an actual project, access to those is available on the input selection. You could see here's analog 1, analog 2, and then the other stereo pairs that we can choose for our input. So if we're going to record from mic input 1, we would set it up like this. If you want to give friendly names back in settings under audio devices, you can just click on the individual name, and I'm going to click on this one here. And if we go down to the alias where it says analog 1, I can rename this to say mic line 1 like this, and that will make it look exactly like it does on the mixer. So that way we can match the input names as they're shown on the mixer to how they appear in Waveform. I'm going to quickly do that, and then I'll show you how that looks. So I set aliases for all of my inputs, and now when I go to select the input under audio, you can see I have mic line 1, mic line 2, the inputs 3, 4, 5, 6, as well as the main left, right. So it makes it very easy to select what I'm choosing when I set up my channels for recording. So that's the Mackie Onyx 8. If you're looking for a compact mixer, or you prefer to use a mixer instead of an audio interface for the simplicity of having front panel controls and connections for all of your instruments, then this might be something to look at. For me, it's kind of a utility, a Swiss Army knife of functionality that I can use for different things. I can use it for multi-track recording. I can use it for stereo playback for different types of situations. I also use it for voice over work. And it's easy to grab if you've got a small live gig or speaking engagement where you just need some way to mix some microphones together. These are typically well under $500, so it's fairly affordable. The sound quality, I think, is great, on par with anything else in this type of price range, and definitely something to consider. To learn more about the Onyx series, check out my other video review of the Onyx 16 that you'll find linked right here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video very soon.